Welcome to another episode of A Drummer's Guide 2. So this episode I'm going to be talking about failure. It's something that terrifies everyone, including myself, but the older I get, the longer I do this, the more I realise that actually it's a really positive thing and something that is the best way to learn really quickly and to get a real blueprint of what I should be working on, definitely. And these can be tiny little day-to-day minuscule failures, if you like, or they can be absolutely astronomical. And in this episode I'm going to be talking exactly about the most astronomical failure, the most ironic failure in hindsight, and yeah, I hope you enjoy and you get something from this. Today I wanted to talk about basically one of the most difficult experiences that I had in my drumming career, have had so far. Hopefully none will be as heartbreaking as what happened to me, but it's something that I definitely learnt the most from, I definitely grew the most from, and it made me realise how much I wanted to do this as a living. So I'll give you some backstory about what happened rather than just speaking in this sort of cryptic way. So what happened was I'd been playing in lots of different bands, and one day I got a call from a friend of a guy that I had been working with, who basically said that their drummer had broken, I think it was his wrist, and couldn't play. And this guy was like his regular recording drummer, he'd done loads of stuff with him, and he said to me, you know, would you be up for doing this session? And I was just like, this was the kind of call that I'd been waiting to get, like, the whole of my drumming career. I was like 17 at the time. In fact, I think I was 16 at the time. And I was like, yes, amazing, yes, of course, I'd love to do that. Like, I was just thinking, this is it, this is going to be my ticket into the session recording world, this is exactly what I want to be doing, someone's finally calling me to do this, I can go and do an amazing job. And in my head I was going, it'd be great, I'm going to go into the studio, I'm going to record for these people, and they're going to realise how amazing I am, and then they're going to be calling me for all of their sessions, and they're going to tell all their producer friends, and then they're going to all be calling me, and I'm going to be the next big session drummer on all those tracks. You know, this really unrealistic view of how the whole thing worked, basically. But hey, this is just what I had in my head. I was 16. You know, we all think like this in these ways that we think is the right way of thinking. So anyway, I got sent these tracks. I think there were 5 tracks. In fact, I think I managed to actually find these tracks at some point. I should probably post them up somewhere. So I got sent these 5 tracks. I was like, great. There was like a week between getting the call and the session. I remember when it was that I got the call, actually. It was January 7th, 2000, must have been 2005, yeah, 17. And I was watching The Lion King in the West End with my mum and my sister. And that's when I got the call. Anyway, they sent through these songs and I was like, wicked, got a week to learn them. I remember I rented out, because I didn't have anywhere to practice, so I rented out a studio in Denmark Street in central London. I went and practiced these songs for like, I think I spent a couple of days sort of like practicing them, and I was just like, yeah, this is amazing. And prior to this, I'd had a little bit of recording experience, but it was more with bands that I was playing with, which, as I found out, was a very different situation. So I thought that it would be exactly the same sort of vibe, and every time that I'd recorded with bands that I was playing with, you know, it was fine, it was great. You know, we were all playing together in a room, and maybe I would record the drums first and then everyone would lay tracks on top of that, but it was fine, you know. And then so the day came and I sort of like had prepped all my drums. I think I might have even bought new drum heads, you know, done some extra babysitting to get some cash, and sort of like I tuned up all the drums. I was like, amazing. So I went to go do this session, and again, I can't remember the studio, but it was in central London. It was around the Soho kind of area. And I remember it was downstairs, that's what I remember. Got there, met the producer, lovely man. In fact, I'll give him a shout. His name's Steve Wellington. He lives in Paris, and he's awesome. Yeah, he's a great, really great producer. And I knew him through, I was working with a band called Visitor Q. I say working with, I was in a band called Visitor Q, and that band and his band, I think they were called Project X, but I can't remember for sure. I'm almost certain that they were. They were part of the Afro-punk scene that was kind of around London at the time. Yeah, so he was the producer. Went in, met him, lovely. He's like, oh, cool, do you want to go set up? I was like, yeah, fine, brilliant, great, okay. So I went and I set up my drums, cool. And then the engineer was miking them up, and I was out in the control room with Steve, and he was like, oh, so like, how did you get on with the tracks? Are you happy? I was like, yeah, you know, they're really cool, really like them, yeah, it's going to be awesome. I was trying to not give it the big I am, but trying to be confident about it, even though inside I was like completely like, oh, this is so terrifying, this is my fit. I was so nervous, understandably. I thought that this was my gateway into sort of like, you know, playing with the biggest artists in the world and being the most recorded drummer in the world. You know, that was kind of my ambition, and that was my what I believe was going to be the door opening for that, or my foot in the door, if you like. So anyway, engineer set up all the mics, whatever. It's like, great, okay, so should we start on the first track? I was like, yeah, amazing. He was like, do you have a preference? I was like, oh no, yeah, whatever you want. Okay, cool, right, we'll start with this one. I was like, wicked, great. Went into the live room, sat down behind the kit, sort of like, well, in fact, before that, I would have played a bit just to get some gain structures and whatever, so they could have got the gain structure, I could have got on mixing my headphones. Anyway, then we went to actually record the song. I was like, right, ready to go? I was like, yeah, amazing. I was like, right, this is it, this is my moment to shine. Anyway, they hit record, and everything just fell apart, like, completely. And the worst thing about it was, I was playing, I remember this, I was playing, and obviously there's a click, and then there's the backing track, there's the guide track, and I wasn't playing with the click. The feel was all wrong. I wasn't locking in with the track, I wasn't playing consistently. All of this was happening simultaneously, and the worst thing about it was that I could hear how bad it was, but I couldn't rectify it because I just didn't have the experience. I just was like, why does this not sound how I've been, like, why does this not sound the same as how I was practicing it in the rehearsal room? Why does this not feel right? You know, of course, the things that I was practicing to in the rehearsal room had drums on them, so I was just playing along to the drums. And at this point, I hadn't learnt about the thing of actually recording myself and listening back to get feedback on this. So I was just like, in real time, just going, oh my god, this is awful. Anyway, we finished the take, and then in my head, I went, maybe it doesn't sound as bad as what I think it does. Maybe I'm being really harsh on myself, because I've always been the kind of person that's very harsh on myself. So I thought, okay, maybe I'm just being oversensitive, maybe I'm being harsh on myself, okay. And then I heard him in the control room and say, yeah, so, yeah, cool. How's your mix? Do you need a bit more click, or, you know, do you need anything different? And I was like, oh no. I was like, yeah, okay, yeah, maybe a bit more click, that would be really good. And then he's like, okay, cool, great. Well, what we'll do is we'll do another take. And in my head, I'm going, oh my gosh, it's awful, he hates it. And of course then, as bad as it already started out being, my voices in my head started going and just going, you're awful, you can't do this, it sounds terrible, blah, blah, blah. You know, they're paying for studio time, they're paying for you to be here, and you're not doing the job. So anyway, I should go for another take. I was like, okay, yeah, you know, trying to be upbeat, trying to be, you know, but inside dying. And then did another take. And then he came in. I mean, the second take, I mean, it was worse than the first, like, easily first than the, because obviously then you become really self-conscious, and then you're not, you know, you're kind of like even more wobbly. I mean, I was already wobbly to start with, I'm not sure how much more wobbly I could have gone. Anyway, and then he came into the live room after that and just said, look, you know, are you okay? Do you know, is everything all right? Do you want to do another one? And I'm like, yeah, no, that'd be good. Yeah, let's do another one. And then he sort of left the live room, and I was thinking, oh my gosh, he's had to come into the live room to talk to me, that's how bad this is. And so I did a third take, and then he came into the live room again, and he just said to me, look, Emily, I'm so sorry, but I'm just gonna have to ask you to leave. I can't, like, this just isn't working. He was so sweet. He was really sweet about it. He wasn't mean. He was willing me so hard to do it well. You know, when you just feel that. But he just, obviously I couldn't do the job. And I'd love to say that I was like, yeah, I understand. I burst into tears. That's actually what happened. I was 17 years old. I burst completely into tears. I was trying to hold them back, but I was doing all the hyperventilating, the whole shebang. And he was so kind and he was so sweet. He's like, look, I'm just really sorry. It's just not going to work. And, you know, I'll pay for your travel. Like, I don't want you to have lost out. But essentially they were left with these tracks that had no drums on it. They were left with a studio that had been rented out and the job hadn't been done. And it was just like, it was so mortifying, not just on a personal level, like of my playing, but of, excuse me, of wasting all these other people's time. It was just like, I just didn't know where I was at. Anyway, I had to do the shame of like packing up my drums whilst everyone's still there. And at that point, I think that a bass player had come in who I was meant to play with so they could attract that live as well. But this bass player was there, like, I wish I could remember who he was. And he just totally nailed like all the tracks like straight away. And whilst I was packing up, sort of like, he probably came in and go, what the hell is going on? So anyway, so yeah, and I remember the journey home, and I just remember in fact, I remember because I took a cab, and the guy that drove me, because I couldn't drive at this point either, so the guy that drove me, all I remember about him was that he was so sweet. We didn't speak anything about where I'd come from, what I'd been doing, nothing. But he was telling me about all this other stuff about his life, and I remember getting a little bit of perspective, and I think actually at that time that's exactly what I needed, because I really would have gone down a bad like hole. Anyway, I got home and my parents were like, oh, how did it go? And I obviously burst into tears, but what I distinctly remember, I did sort of say what had happened, but I was so embarrassed and ashamed that, you know, this thing that I'd been working towards for, at that time, 6 years, which of course when you're 17, it feels like a really long time, you know, and you've dedicated yourself to this thing. And then when finally you got your opportunity, it's like you failed, essentially. I mean, that's what happened. I failed. You couldn't fail much better than I did. I mean, I really did. But what I distinctly remember is trying to blame the fact that the drums that I had were an entry-level drum kit and things like that, which actually in hindsight that was nothing, 0% to do with why it wasn't working. But I remember sort of using that as an excuse and then kind of not glossing over the fact that I physically couldn't do it, but you know, that was sort of, I was trying to lessen that as much as I could. But what that led to, so this, I think the session must have been done on a Friday or something like that. And then on the Saturday and the Sunday, I was just inconsolable. I shut myself away in my room. I just didn't know what to do. Like I said, I'd worked towards this thing for so long, and when I finally got the opportunity, I wasn't good enough. And I'd never had that feeling before. Everything that I'd taken on before that point, it might have been difficult, yes, but I could work it out. I could always just work that bit harder towards a very specific thing and, you know, and make it happen by whenever it needed to be done. But in such a concentrated period of time, you can't suddenly get 5 years worth of experience within the time between 2 takes. It's just not, it's not going to happen. It's not realistic. And I just remember being so heartbroken that how I felt was the drums had let me down. I've always had this thing, right? So ever since I was really young, before I started playing drums, like there would always be stuff that's going on. Everyone has stuff that goes on in their life for whatever reason. But whenever the stuff was bad and I was feeling, you know, things around me were not good and the people around me maybe were not good, I always came back to, okay, but what I can now do is put my energy into the drums, because the drums have never let me down. The drums have never betrayed me. If I put in the work on the drums, it gives back to me, and I'm progressing, and I know that because it's a logical thing. And this was the first time that I felt at that moment, the drums have let me down. The drums have betrayed me. What actually it was is that it's not I had betrayed myself, I just wasn't ready for it. And I hadn't worked hard enough at that point. The reality is I hadn't had enough experience, and unfortunately this was just going to be part of my experience, and it was the roughest time. I've never been so heartbroken in my life. I wouldn't leave my room, I wouldn't speak to anyone, like literally nothing. And all I kept thinking was, that's it, I'm not good enough. I need to put down the sticks. I mean, that's so dramatic. Oh my God, so dramatic. I was just like going, well, you know, I guess I had a good run. I had a good 6 years. I'd played some great gigs. And I'd done some great stuff. It was really fun. But yeah, I was kind of like, for 2 days, I was like, that's it. That's the end of my dream. I can't do that. I can't suffer that kind of heartbreak ever again. And honestly, I've never had such heartbreak ever since. That day, that moment, was devastating to me, like absolutely devastating. It's like all my dreams, my passion, my hard work all came crashing down within a matter of what would have been 30 minutes, I guess. So I spent these 2 days in bed, and then my mum basically dragged me out of the house, said, right, on the Monday, right, I'm going down the bank, you're coming with me, we're going to walk down to the bank. And I was like, okay. So I got out of the house, and I think fresh air is good for me, and walking is even better for me. Whenever I'm having a rough time, I go for a really long walk, and then I can kind of think through things. And we sort of chatted about stuff, and gradually I kind of realised, okay, maybe this isn't the end of everything. Like, yes, I could hang up my proverbial sticks and say, well, I had a good run. But then there was this other part of me that went, or I could face head on everything that went wrong in that recording session and learn from it. And although that was terrifying, because it was admitting that, you know, I'm a perfectionist. I think a lot of musicians are. And to admit that you're not that perfect person, to admit that you do have a lot to work on, to admit that you couldn't do the job. And, you know, I told people that I was going to do this session. Of course I did. I was proud to have gotten this phone call. This was not a phone call that my peers had gotten yet. And, you know, and it was like, I'm doing it. I was being paid. It was my first time being properly, well, it wasn't. I wasn't properly paid because I didn't do the job. But it would have been my first time being properly paid for something that, if that was a regular thing, I could have lived off that sort of thing. And yeah, to be able to just go, okay, I'm not good enough, but say that with, but I'm going to work on it, was the most, I mean, it was terrifying. It was terrifying. It was, in a sadistic way, very empowering though. And basically what happened was I then became obsessed with fixing all the things that went wrong in that session. So, metronome. I'd played to clicks before, of course I had. I you know, that's like number one rule, drummer. Timing, that's it. So of course you're meant to play to a metronome. Ridiculous. But I just, like, everything I did, everything was to a click. Every gig that I played, I would say, guys, I'm gonna do this to a click, so just follow me. I want to, you know, I need to get this better. I hope you don't mind. I'm going to do this. And all the bands that I was playing with covers bands at that time. I was playing with originals bands, and they were like, yeah, of course, yeah, fine. I mean, they were like, great, yeah, fine, whatever. So I did that. So yeah, that was try. Oh, that's it. Well, I went and had lessons as well with people that specifically worked a lot with the click. I learnt a lot. I learnt about, you know, I saw the click as my enemy almost for a long time, until, in fact, there was one particular lesson from someone that I've spoken about before, Andrew Small, who told me about how he sees time and the fact that it's sort of more circular rather than this linear thing, which is how I used to see it. And he said to me, you know, you just got to make the click your friend. And it's such a simple thing to say, but I had been fighting against it. I'd been like, this is this thing that's like rooting me to something that, you know, I want to be free. And my timing's always been very good, but when playing to a click, clearly it wasn't, you know, spot on. So to get into that mind frame of using it as an ally as opposed to being an enemy was a massive like turnaround. So I focused on that. I focused on playing consistently. And again, I mean, I've spoken about this before, where when I was a kid, I remember sort of playing on this rubbish drum kit. It was actually really nice. It was a vintage kit, but it was just really busted up. And when I played on it, it sounded awful. And then this kid who was 3 years older than me played on it, and I thought it sounded magical. And that was kind of, I don't think I realised at the time the gravity of that situation. I don't think that's the right word, but you know what I mean, like the potency of that situation, until I sort of got to that point of going, right, well, consistency and the sound of the kit. It's not the fact that I was playing on a Yamaha Stage Custom. Yes, it's not, you know, the highest end kit, but I tell you what, it sounds blooming good. It does, and I still believe that. And if you play it in the right way, that's a recordable kit, easily, definitely. So yeah, there was that, and then obviously locking in with songs. I became obsessed with that, absolutely obsessed. Playing along with music, just, that's what I would do for hours. I would just lock myself away. And then that, coupled with a lesson that I had a year later with, again, a drummer that I've spoken about before, I will continue to speak about because he's wonderful, Billy Ward, wonderful drummer, who said to me, you know, record yourself and listen back. That's the best way you're going to learn anything. And although I didn't implement that that lesson and that advice for a while, literally the week that I did, my growth went exponentially up, like so quick. I still do it, and it wasn't, as I always say, it wasn't in some fancy studio I was recording myself. It was on a tiny little mini tape player. But even that, I'd say that was the catalyst to really get me over the hurdle of sort of like worrying about it. And yeah, but consequently, I was still terrified of recording, like so terrified. This was my only professional experience recording, and like I say, I'd been recording with bands, but when you're playing in a band, I feel like there's a certain leeway with things like that, whereas when you're playing for an artist, for a producer who has an idea in their head and you're trying to convey that, there's a very different mindset that you need to be in, and the precision side of things has to be your priority. So anyway, and yeah, this whole thing, it terrified me for a very long time, and I worked incessantly on these things. But I feel like had this thing have not happened, or if I'd have made the other decision of just going, I can't do this, obviously I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have toured around the world. I wouldn't have recorded on a bunch of stuff. And although it was literally the most painful thing I've ever been through, and the most painful realisation, and the most let down I felt about myself, about my ability, about my dedication, about my drums, everything, it made me so much stronger. And so the next professional session that I did after that was in 2008 with a band called The Hours. That was my next professional session. Again, I'd done a couple of ones with bands in between, but by that point I was kind of, it wasn't that the ones with the bands didn't count, it was just a different focus. So yeah, and so the first session I did after this one when I was 17 was in 2008. It was with The Hours, and the producer was a lovely, lovely man called Flood, who's worked with like U2, Sigur Rós. I mean, he's wonderful, like a wonderful producer, but obviously he's like this huge producer, and I'm like terrified. And I was like, oh my gosh, and I was really inside of my head, and I really kind of like was worried. Again, we were recording as a band, so it wasn't as microscopic, but I was so lucky in that next professional experience was with, again, like I say, Steve Wellington, such a sweet, kind, compassionate, empathetic producer, and he was so kind to me. I will never forget that. He's wonderful. But I was very lucky that Flood was also very similar. He was so he was just all about getting the best out of everyone in that room. And I'm sure that he could feel my reservation, I was the youngest in the band by a long way as well, just to add insult to injury. So I was extra kind of worried. But he was so kind and supportive. And I mean, to be honest, that's a sign of a great producer to me. Someone that can bring out the best in everyone. But yeah, I mean, and then we did that session, and that was, I think we were in Rack for like 2 weeks with him doing an album. And that went great. And it was like this moment of like, okay, from 17 to I was then 21. No, sorry, I was 20. So those 3 years of basically just laser focus on basically not eliminating, because you'll never eliminate sort of your weaknesses, but just a laser focus on strengthening these weaknesses that let me down on that one day. 3 years of that. And then to do this session when I was 20, and nothing was said in a good way, like as in no one was going, oh, she's a bit, oh, it's a bit, none of that. It was just like, great, cool, next song. I was just like, oh my gosh, it worked. Like, it's actually worked. So yeah, I believe that, people might look at any drummer, really, any musician, in fact, anyone that's successful in anything and go, oh yeah, well, it's been a smooth ride for them, they've never had any failure, they've never done anything wrong. I guarantee you they have. And the reason that I wanted to share this is because I wanted to share my most painful moment. I wanted to share the fact that, someone right now might be going through something so similar, where something has happened and they've gone, oh my God, I'm not good enough. And I mean, I've spoken before as well. That's my whole thing. My whole thing is I want to be good at something. I've never felt good enough. Drums is the only thing where I felt that I could be good enough at something. So for something like that to happen, where someone is literally saying to you, you're not good enough, so much so that you just need to leave. If I can get through that, I guarantee you that if you do go through something like that, where you're just going, I failed. If you just focus on, okay, use it as an opportunity. Right, okay, what went wrong? X, Y, Z. All right, what am I going to do? I'm going to sort it out. Right, X, Y, Z for the next however long until it's done, until it's sorted, until I've totally nailed it. And, and yes, there will always be indiscrepancy. There will always be, the odd song or whatever where it comes in and it takes me a minute to kind of lock with it. That's okay. That's fine. But the fact that you can kind of take that time to, in a way, it was kind of a blessing. It kind of put onto paper, well, here's the things you need to be working on for the next however many years. These are your weaknesses. Go fix them. It was great. Like I said, at the time, devastating. In hindsight, wonderful. And possibly, in fact, definitely, 100% the best thing that has happened to me for my drumming, and for my progress, and what has made me become where I am now. I mean, it's crazy. So I went from having like this just nightmare situation, nightmare session. It literally couldn't have gone worse. Literally couldn't have gone worse. The only way that it could have gone worse is that the building went on fire or something. Couldn't have gone worse. And yet, I mean, granted, it's 14 years later. Well, it opened 2 years ago. So 12 years later, 12 years after that has happened, I now have my own studio and I record people from everywhere on my own terms. I mean, talk about a turnaround from, not being able to do this one session to then doing that. It's just like, you can work through it. You can. It's hard work. But I tell you what, there's nothing like it, and it definitely pays off. So yeah, if you can just like get through those moments that will be tough, then you can definitely, you'll come back so much stronger. So anyway, anyone that is going through that sort of stuff, anything different, all the same, just keep going. Use it as a guide, a map to what you should be working on, what you need to be working on. And I'm living proof that you can not only come out the other side, but end up doing that, but for like using a lot of your time doing the exact thing that you were absolutely terrified of just a few years earlier. So anyway, I'm going to stop rambling on. I'm sure that this is plenty long enough for you to get some stuff on.
Well, I hope that episode helped you a little bit. If you are struggling with something that you feel like you've failed at recently, I hope that you can relate and you can see that in the future you may look back at this moment of failure, if you like, and go, actually, do you know what? That's the best thing that ever happened to me, because I certainly feel like that about my studio experience. And even now, being able to tell you guys about it, I think it just continues to be valuable. Since the day it happened, it's become one of the most valuable things in my life. So I consider myself incredibly lucky that I failed at that very moment. And as I say, ironically, now I run my own studio, which reminds me, if there is anyone out there that wants some drums recorded on their music, then head on over to emilydrums.com. And I do that when I'm not on the road. When I'm at home, I'm in the studio. And that's just how I like it. Yay! So I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you would like to hear any more, if you would like to ask your own questions, if you would just like to do anything, head over to www.adrummersguide2.com. You can sign up to the mailing list so you don't miss out on any subjects. You can suggest topics you'd like me to cover, or ask me specific questions. But just come say hi, and we can have a chat. Anyway, hope you're having a great day, and I will see you next week for another subject. All right, see you later. Bye.